Now the hour grows late and it's high time for sleep. What, another story? Well, perhaps just one more. Have I told you the tale of Clotilda and the Wyvern? No? How odd, for it is one of my favourites. There once was a maiden who lived far away, a lady-in-waiting at the court of the great king. Clotilda was her name. She had long hair, as black as a raven's wing, and 2 rosy cheeks beneath her blue-grey eyes. Among all the ladies at court, she was not especially favoured. Clotilda was fair, but she was not the fairest. She was tall, but not the tallest. And she was witty, but certainly not the wittiest, with a jest or a turn of phrase. But Clotilda was brave and bold and clever. Alas, these qualities were hardly prized in ladies of the nobility. At the beginning of every day, the king, the queen, and their son, the prince, would serenely glide past the lines of lords and ladies before taking their places on their majestic thrones to hear the petitions of their subjects and pass judgment. The monarchs would smile to their favourites and give a brief nod of recognition to the rest. The maidens all curtsied to the prince as to the king and queen, but then they would lift their eyes and smile to try to engage the young man's attention, for they all hoped to be chosen as his bride one day. Clotilda alone never smiled at the prince when she rose from her curtsy, but would rather regard him coolly, without lowering her gaze. She did not particularly like the prince, nor did she dislike him. Oh, he was handsome enough, tall and broad of shoulder, but rather she envied him, for he could do what she could not. The prince had little interest in matters of court. He spent his days in sport, riding his horse over the countryside, hunting and practising the combat arts with his fellows. These were things that Clotilda longed to do herself. The prince scarcely noticed Clotilda or any of the other ladies. It was known that he had no liking for those who lived at his parents' court. He thought them all vain and frivolous. But Typhane, the most favoured of the maiden ladies at court, would often chide Clotilda for her boldness. "Do you think the prince will notice your insolence and be amused? Do you think he will favour you over me? Why, you are as the ribwort that grows in the rose garden, a weed to be plucked." For Typhane assumed that she would be chosen to marry the prince, and most agreed. "Pay her no heed," whispered Elisana at her side. "Her only joy is to heap scorn on others." Elisana was Clotilda's only friend at court. Now know that ladies were allowed to ride horses at pageants and tournaments, but they rode in full dress, astride ponies that pranced slowly, so as not to ruffle the long veils that streamed from the hennins perched delicately on the ladies' heads. But Clotilde liked to gallop freely through the woods and across meadows, wearing a doublet and pantaloons. She also liked to practice archery with the longbow that her father left her, and for this she needed the solitude of the field. Women were not allowed to use weapons of war. For these brief but joyous forays into the lands surrounding the castle, Clotilda depended on her friend. Elisana would make sure that both of their chores and duties were complete, and would swear if asked that Clotilda was somewhere near or away on an errand. Clotilda knew that she could count on a few hours of uninterrupted sport, perhaps once a week, for she trusted Elisana, as your legs trust your feet, and as your belly trusts your tongue. In return, Clotilda would often bring a rabbit or a brace of partridges for Elisana's ailing mother. One day, Clotilda was riding through the southern woods the air streaming freely around her uncovered head and her quiver on her back, when she spotted a man galloping on a horse, with his spear lowered like a lance. It was the prince. Clotilde followed to see what he was about, as she had never seen how men hunt. Presently, she saw that it was a wild boar that the prince pursued. The animal used all of its wiles to avoid death, now charging the prince's horse, then running away or hiding in the brambles. The prince must have outdistanced his comrades, for there were no other riders to be seen. He stalked his quarry alone. As the prince's horse cantered into a small meadow of hogweed and yarrow, a sudden beating of wings could be heard overhead. To her horror, Clotilde saw a great winged monster descend upon the prince. His steed reared and toppled its rider to the ground, then bolted away in terror. The monster had a horned reptilian head, a long tail, and wings like those of some gargantuan bat. The beast seized the prince in his claws and took wing, flying towards the mountains to the south. Clotilde cast her gaze about for the other hunters, desperate for someone to tell the prince's predicament to, but there was no one there. Fearing that the prince would be lost forever, she spurred her horse on in pursuit, stealing glances at the sky as she followed the flying beast, while at the same time trying to avoid the branches that sometimes scratched at her face. Up she rode south into the foothills of the mountains until her surroundings darkened. The mountains now shaded all from the rays of the late afternoon sun. At last, she lost sight of the winged monster, and her horse could go no further. Clotilde dismounted and cast herself onto the ground, weeping in despair. A soft rain fell all around her. Presently, she was startled by a soft touch on her hair. She lifted her head to see a tiny man, no larger than a small child. He had long ears and wore a large pointed hat. "Who are you?" Clotilde asked. "I am called Dabeltzan," the mannequin answered. "But what are you?" she asked again. "I am a kobold," the mannequin answered again. "A kobold?" Clotilde repeated. She had heard stories of these tiny hill folk, but had never believed them. "Why do you weep, lady?" This time Dabeltzan asked the question. "Alas, my lord the prince has been carried off by a flying monster. I fear he is being devoured even now. I dread returning to the castle to tell his parents, the king and queen, that they have lost their only son." "A flying monster, with a long tail and huge wings like a bat?" Clotilde nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, your prince was taken by a wyvern. One lives in a cave not far from here." "Ah, what is a wyvern, you ask? Well, it is somewhat like a dragon, one of the types of drakes that can fly. But whereas a dragon has 4 legs and a pair of wings, the wyvern has but 2 legs and 2 wings, like a bat. It waddles or hops on the ground like a bird. Most wyverns can't breathe fire or speak, as many dragons can, and they certainly cannot cast magic spells, as a few dragons have been known to. But wyverns are ferocious and cunning, and terrible creatures to be feared." "Most likely your prince is not yet dead," Dabeltzan declared. "He is food for the wyvern's hatchling." "What are you saying?" Clotilde's hand fled to her mouth. "Wyverns hunt larger beasts than men. They leave us kobolds alone unless starving, but if one flew so far to catch a man, it must have an egg about to hatch. People are juicy and tender, and the perfect food for a growing wyvern." Clotilde thought a moment. "Perhaps it's not too late then. You say a wyvern lives nearby. Can you go to free the prince?" she asked.
"Why should I want to do that?" the kobold asked in return. "Men are wicked. They hunt us kobolds like rabbits. He may be a prince to you, but he's no more than a rat flea to me. Yet women are kind. They do not hunt us, and they sometimes leave sweetmeats on their window sills for us."
"But it is said that kobolds can make themselves become invisible. You could skulk in and free the prince without being seen. Please, Dabbeltzan."
The kobold just smiled. "Such tales are exaggerations," he said. "We are adept at not being noticed by prying eyes, but wyverns can smell."
"Then show me the way," Clotilda persisted. "I will find the prince, or die in the attempt."
"Ah, he is your betrothed, perhaps?" The mannequin winked an eye.
"No, not that," Clotilda answered. "But I am loyal to the crown, and the prince's death would dismay all those whom I care for and esteem."
"Very well," Dabbeltzan said. "You certainly are a brave one. There is a way in that I can show you."
And so Clotilda followed Dabbeltzan on foot, her horse trailing behind her, as he led the way further up into the foothills of the mountains. After a time, they came to a hole at the bottom of a cliff. It was scarcely large enough for Clotilda to pass through, much less a wyvern.
"This is not the main entrance," Dabbeltzan explained. "We sometimes hide here when there is need, but I have never ventured very far inside. There is a horrible stench and terrible rustling sounds. It can only be part of the wyvern's lair."
"So you are not sure?" she replied. "Very well, then pray thee go in first." The hole gave way to a tunnel that wound up and into the mountainside. Clotilda had to stoop most of the way, while Dabbeltzan strode ahead with a little fairy light that he took from his pocket. Presently they came to a large chamber filled with a great heap of rubbish. The bones of countless creatures lay mouldering in the gloom. Clotilda could see the bones of horses and oxen, stags and boars, and a man. But she could not see the ceiling.
"This pit is the bottom of a shaft," the kobold observed. "This is where the wyvern casts the remains of its meals. It must be part of the beast's lair, just as I thought."
Suddenly, the bones rustled behind them. They turned to see a great spider emerging from the rubble. Clotilda's heart quailed inside her. This was no rabbit or partridge, nor a pear dangling from a tree. Yet somehow she found the courage to draw an arrow from her quiver and nock her bow. Dabbeltzan produced a dagger in his free hand. 2 arrows felled the horrid thing, and the kobold finished the vile creature when it fell on its back. A second spider leapt onto Dabbeltzan, and the kobold screamed as he tried to fend off those dripping fangs with his dagger. Clotilda wavered as she sought a clear shot in the near darkness, then let fly an arrow that pierced the spider's abdomen from one side to the other. Dabbeltzan bowed to Clotilda and said, "Now I am in your debt." "Will you now, then, help me to the end of my quest?" she asked the mannequin.
"I will, lady," the kobold answered.
On the other side of the rubbish heap, the tunnel continued onwards. As Clotilda passed the skeleton of the dead man, something caught her eye. He had a quiver on his back, just as she did, but something gleamed in the faint light. The quivers and all its arrows were rotten and crumbling to dust, save one. A single arrow glittered, made from some silvery metal untarnished by time. Without thinking, Clotilda took the arrow and placed it in her own quiver.
Up and up the tunnel wound, twisting round and round. At last the two came out of the tunnel into a large cave. To their left, the cave opened to the sky. It was high up on the mountainside. To their right, they could see something in the gloom. It was the wyvern's nest. It was woven of tree branches and lay at the back of the cave. "I do not believe that the wyvern is near," Dabblecsan said. "I cannot smell it over the stench of the charnel pit that still fills the air, but I cannot hear it either." Still, he put away his fairy light, and they proceeded inward by the faint moonshine that came in from the night. As they neared the nest, they could see a single egg in its centre. It was easily larger than a man's head, and larger than any cantaloupe that Clotilde had ever seen. And next to the egg lay the prince. Clotilde rushed to his side and rolled him over. His eyes fluttered, but he did not speak. His mail shirt was pierced by the wyvern's talons and soaked in blood. His sword was still in his scabbard. He hadn't even had time to draw it when the wyvern seized him. She pulled the mail shirt off him and looked after his wounds. Thankfully, they were not deep. The wyvern did not kill the prey that it fed to its offspring. "And what are we to do with this egg?" Dabblecsan asked. "Should we not crush it now, so that there will be one less wyvern in the world?" "It is not an easy question," Clotilde answered. "Would you kill a wolf cub, even knowing that it will grow into a threat to your own life?" They had not time to decide, for suddenly there was a great flapping sound outside in the night that both could hear. "The wyvern returns!" the kobold cried. "Quick, help me get the prince back to the tunnel," Clotilde implored. "We haven't the time," Dabblecsan replied. "We will be set upon before we can escape." "Then let us hide further back in the cave. Perhaps there is a space too small for the wyvern. Help me with the prince." The three stumbled further back into the mountain, the prince on his feet but senseless to his surroundings. The cave bent around out of sight of the nest, and they passed through a narrow arch into another large chamber. This one had no exit, no small tunnel for them to escape through, but in the floor there was a great hole, from which arose a foul, familiar stench. "This is the top of the wyvern's charnel pit," the kobold exclaimed. "Oh, what shall we do? I can climb down, but you and the prince will surely fall." Clotilde closed her eyes and tried to calm the terror that threatened to claim her mind. Her heart felt as if it would leap out of her chest on its own. She could hear the wyvern alighting at the entrance to the cave. Then she opened her eyes. "I have a plan," she told the mannequin. The wyvern hobbled into the cave on its feet and wings. It let out a roar of rage when it discovered that its prey was gone. Then it saw the faint light back in the cave and heard the familiar jingle of a man's chainmail. For Clotilde had forgotten that she still held the prince's mail shirt in one hand. She had drawn the prince's sword from its scabbard and passed it through the mail shirt from one sleeve to the other. Then she bade Dabblecsan to stand on one side of the arch, out of sight from the main cave, and hold the hilt of the sword as high as he could with both hands, so that the mail shirt hung in the arch like a curtain. His fairy light near the far edge of the pit cast a large shadow of the shirt back into the main cave. "Oh, you ugly brute!" Dabblecsan boomed in the lowest voice he could manage. "You thought I was food for your wretched spawn, but you are as stupid as you are clumsy." And he jingled the shirt again. The wyvern roared again and followed the voice. When it rounded the bend, it saw the gleam of the mail in the faint light, and thinking it was the man, the great beast charged the arch. At the last instant, Dabblecsan pulled the shirt away and then ran for his life. To Clotilde's consternation, He leapt across the pit, but fell short of the other rim. The wyvern, now confused, clambered through the arch. It flapped its wings and looked about for its enemy. The creature's gaze fell on Clotilda, standing on the other side of the pit, her bow drawn and ready. Clotilda had knocked the metal arrow that she found on the skeleton in the pit. Why she chose that arrow she could not say. She faltered in dismay as she wondered at the kobold's fate. "Shoot, lady, shoot!" Dabbeltzan's voice came from the pit. He had not fallen to the bottom, but had managed to cling to the rocky wall, and he began climbing out on her side of the yawning chasm. As the wyvern prepared to leap across the pit at her, she let the silvery shaft fly. It struck the wyvern in the eye and immediately turned into a brilliant flash of light. The wyvern roared again, this time from pain. Smoke arose from the empty eye socket, and it flailed about, its wings beating the walls of the cave and knocking stalactites and stalagmites loose from their stony roots. The wyvern stumbled forward blindly and tumbled down the shaft into the charnel pit below. Clotilda stood at the edge of the shaft and knocked another arrow. She shot down into the gloom without being able to see her target, again and again, until her quiver was empty. Then she and Dabbeltzan threw pieces of cave rock down into the pit, until, at last, the horrible roaring stopped, and the smell of fresh blood added to the carrion stench. To Clotilda's great surprise, the metal arrow lay on the stone floor, as whole as before. She picked it up and put it back in her quiver. Dabbeltzan then helped her get the prince back to the main cave. "The question of the egg is now moot," Clotilda observed. "Surely the hatchling will die now, with no one to feed it." Dabbeltzan sighed the sigh of the exceedingly vexed, and looked up at the ceiling. Then he took off his pointed hat and placed it over the egg. To the astonishment of both the maiden and the now wakeful prince, the hat stretched and stretched until it covered the entire egg. The kobold then threw the enlarged hat over his shoulder like a sack. Down the tunnel the three made their way, the kobold struggling with his burden, and Clotilda bearing up the still weakened prince. They passed the charnel pit, and saw the wyvern lying dead atop the pile of its prey. A stalagmite pierced its breast. When they finally emerged back into the forest again, Clotilda could not help the prince mount her horse. The poor beast, frightened from being tied to a tree in the midst of the night, was skittish and reared whenever the maiden laid her hands upon it. But Dabbeltzan approached the beast and whispered to it in a low, soothing voice. Then the horse lay down on the fir needles and allowed both Clotilda and the prince to mount. "Farewell, Dabbeltzan. I owe you a great debt, but now I must return the prince to his home." Clotilda had tears on her rosy cheeks as the kobold patted her horse. "Farewell, Clotilda. I must return to my own home now. I hope the prince will no longer hunt us like rabbits." And so they parted ways. Clotilda's horse plodded slowly along, burdened by 2 riders, and still tired from the chase up the foothills. On the way back they saw lit torches in the distance. Too exhausted to fear who it might be, Clotilda called out. "What ho! Answer in the name of the king," came the reply. The prince's comrades had been searching for him throughout the night. When they arrived at the castle, it was already past dawn. None reproached Clotilda for riding off alone, but the king and queen both thanked her and bestowed gifts upon her. The prince was bade by the court physician to rest in bed for many days, to allow the potions and poultices time to heal his wounds. When he was fully awake, the prince sent for Clotilda. "I never knew your name before, but I know it now, brave Clotilda," he told her. "I fear that I still do not know yours, my lord. We always just called you the prince," she replied. "I am Geoffrey," he said gently, though his pride was hurt. The prince summoned Clotilda back to his presence every day and asked her to recount her adventure in detail, and bade her to leave out nothing until she protested. "Prince Geoffrey, there is no more that I can tell you." But the prince already knew the tale by heart. He only wanted to hear Clotilda's voice, for she was like no other lady he had ever known, a worthy woman indeed, and he found himself in love with her. "Then tell me how you could ever love me," Geoffrey replied. "For if you will marry me, I will do whatever is in my power to make it so." And Clotilda saw a look in his eyes that she had never seen in any other man. Something stirred in her that she had not felt so strongly before. So she pondered for a moment and weighed her answer well. "I will consent to marry thee on 2 conditions," she said. "First, that I be allowed to ride and practice archery and engage in any other sport that I desire." And the prince nodded his assent. "Second," Clotilda continued, "that your father the king shall decree that all are forbidden to hunt the kobold folk of the hills." "The kobolds?" Geoffrey asked, puzzled. "Have you not heard my tale a dozen times now?" she retorted. "But for a kobold, you would be food for a wyvern hatchling now. I never would have found the monster's lair without him." And the prince nodded his assent to that condition too. So it came to pass that Clotilda and Geoffrey were married, and she became Princess Clotilda, and faithful Elisana became the princess's own lady-in-waiting and confidant. And sharp-tongued Typhane? Why, she was forced to marry the king's old widowed constable, the only proposal she ever received. She nagged the poor man until the end of his days, and neither were happy. And thereafter Clotilda and Geoffrey rode through the countryside together and challenged each other at feats of archery and laughed together until their sides ached. Clotilda's love for the prince grew to match his own for her. And on their first anniversary, the prince gave her a magnificent new quiver to hold her magic arrow and the others. Then, when the prince and princess welcomed their firstborn, Dabaltzan visited the court and was welcomed as a hero. And when Geoffrey ascended the throne on his father's death, Clotilda was also crowned queen, and they reigned in peace ever after. Oh, what's that you ask? What of the wyvern egg? Did the kobolds cook it and eat it, or did they allow the hatchling to live? Well, that is a very good question, and that is another story.